Hello, friends, and welcome once again from outer space. I can just see the International Space Station out of the corner of my eye as I talk to you. No, I can't really, but I'm having a bit of fun here. Okay, so uh, I'm going to continue today with the reading of this these diaries. Whoops, can you see that? The Diaries of Sir Ernest Mason Sarto, 1861 to 1869, edited by Robert Morton and myself. This is the Eureka Press version, Eureka Press of Kyoto. And here's the Japanese side of it, if you can see that. Ernest Sato Nikki, Bakumatsu Ishinki Hen. Okay, so this book is still available from the publisher, and I've already given his email before, but I'll probably give it again in the description. And now it's come out this well, I've brought it out as a paperback just, and I've talked about that as well. But anyway, today I'm just going to read the remaining part of 1862 when Ernest Sato finally arrives in Japan for the first time. So just bear with me while I share the text. There we go. Ernest Sato's diary, Japan, 2nd of September to 2nd of December, 1862. So you can see from that that he didn't always, he didn't write every day. So from the 2nd of December, 1862 to the end of the year, there were no entries. But anyway, here we go. So Tuesday, 2nd of September, embarked at midday on board the Lancefield. That would be, I don't know if that's HMS Lancefield. I think it probably is, but it's either a Royal Navy ship or it's a merchant ship. And dropped down to Wusung in the afternoon. This is going from Shanghai to the river mouth, where the river meets the sea, the Yangtze meets the sea, taking the Lanric in tow. We anchored about 10 miles outside and nearly ran ashore. I began to feel ill almost as soon as I got on board, which I suspect was caused by my having drunk too much champagne within the last 24 hours. On the Wednesday, 3rd of September, I was sick. While I was lying below, we struck a junk which was at anchor. The shock seemed tremendous as it struck close to my berth. We lost part of the stage from which the standing rigging springs and carried off one prong of the junk's anchor. On Friday, the 4th of September, about 11 a.m., we passed Iwoshima, that would be Iojima, according to the footnote below, also known as Satsuma Iojima, a volcanic island south of Kyushu, that would be Kyushu. So he's not yet familiar with how to spell Kyushu. A cloud on the top rendered it doubtful whether she was in eruption, though I saw steam in one of the fissures. It is opposite Kagoshima Bay, which runs up far into the land. The entrance is guarded on the west by a perfectly conical mountain and the richly wooded promontory of Chichakov on the east. Monday, the 8th of September, arrived in Yokohama Bay. Paid respects to the colonel and took rooms at the hotel for the present. That would be Colonel Neil, I think. Took tiffin at the legation mess, composed of Eusden, Willis, Jenkins, Aplin, Price, and the commander of the Centaur. Rode in the race courses in the evening. Okay, let's see if we can just move down a bit. I want to scroll down. If I can't scroll down, this is going to be tricky. Whoops. Well, yes. Oh, scrolling. That seems to be scrolling, is it? Oh, but it's a page at a time. Anyway, um, all right. So, oh, there we are. Good. So here are all the footnotes. Ah, sorry. For page one. So we've got Kagoshima, Kaimon-dake. The southernmost tip of Kyushu is known as Cape Sata, Sata Misaki. Yokohama, he means Yokohama. And Sato added color to this rather curt description of his arrival in Diplomat. That's a diplomat in Japan. And so this is quoted from a diplomat in Japan. Um, as we know from his entry of 29th of July, 1862, he was in fact not happy to be leaving Peking for Japan when he did, but he overlooked this in the later account. So the colonel was Edward St. John Neal, the chargé d'affaires, while the minister Rutherford Alcock was on leave. Sarto had briefly met him on the 12th of April, 1862 in Peking. Richard Eusden was secretary of the legation, William Willis, the doctor. He would become a close friend of Sarto's. G.R. Jenkins, the other legation doctor, Captain Vincent Aplin, commander of the legation guard, Lieutenant Alfred Adams Price, a member of the legation guard. Nowadays, Kanagawa is the name of the prefecture which has Yokohama as its capital. At the time, it was, according to Francis Hall, a long straggling city of 2 or 3 streets in breadth lying on the Tokaido. It might properly be called a suburb of Yedo, for on each side of the Tokaido is a continuous row of dwellings and shops to that city, broken by 2 short intervals only. This is from F.G. Notehelfer, edited Japan Through American Eyes, Princeton University Press, 1992, page 29. And okay, so this is Tuesday, the 9th of September, went to Kanagawa and was introduced to the S.R. Brown, all right, Reverend Samuel Robbins Brown, an American missionary with the Dutch Reformed Church. In Diplomat, Sato wrote that he was printing a book, colloquial Japanese, at the time. Okay, so we go to the next page. Can we? Yes, and his wife. Okay, good. Saw Lauder there, a pale, meanly faced fellow who, it appears, seduced Miss Brown last December and has now come down from Hakodate to be married to the young lady. Hakodate, that is. So he's not familiar with Japanese names at this point. Okay. Friday, the 12th of September, called on Colonel Neal, who said he had not got a house for us yet, and referred me to Eusden for information on the subject of teachers, books, etc. When I called on that amiable old youth, he immediately proceeded to say that teachers could not be got, and that as for servants, everyone in the settlement was ill or had run away. Nevertheless, he said he would try to do something for me. Dined at the legation mess, where Willis and Jenkins immediately said they would take up my cause and pitch into Colonel Neal on the subject. Took a very pleasant walk by the side of a stream which runs up into the county at the back of the settlement. I think that should be country, should it not? Under the shade of some banks about 100 feet high, covered with trees and underwood, plenty of ferns, but only of 2 or 3 sorts, such as Athea Felix Mass. Climbed up to the top and had a capital view over the settlement to Kanagawa. The scenery is very English. All the fields are divided from one another by hedges with trees in them. Wednesday, the 17th September, last Saturday, Jenkins spoke to Neal about quarters for us, but could get nothing out of him. Robertson made a like failure in the afternoon. He also asked the colonel to let us stop at Yokohama, as Yedo is a very bad place for learning Japanese. However, as Sir Rutherford Alcock, Sir R.A., is so soon coming again, he is rather averse to altering existing arrangements. He desires to go home on leave, and I suppose to stay. Morrison is to come out again, Vyse to go up to Hakodate, and Winchester to come here. Okay, let's see if we can scroll down a little to look at the footnotes again. You can always pause. Oh dear, pause to read the footnotes yourself. Anyway, there's a footnote about John Frederick Lauder, 1843 to 1902, so he was born in the same year as Sato, a student interpreter and Rutherford Alcock's stepson. He had narrowly escaped being killed in an attack on the legation on July 5th, 1861. He became acting consul at Kanagawa, 1869 to 1870. He was called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn on April 30th, 1872, after which he resigned from the consular service in 1872 and worked for some time as a lawyer for the Japanese government. He received the Order of the Rising Sun from the Foreign Office list 1904 and the Times February the 10th, 1902. Julia Brown, the daughter of Reverend S.R. Brown, is mentioned, and Hakodate, a city in the south of Hokkaido. It was among the first Japanese ports to be opened to foreign trade in 1854. Atherium filix mas, or robust male fern. Russell Brooke Robertson, student interpreter. Edo, now known as Tokyo. At the time, it was the de facto capital of Japan, although the emperor still resided in Kyoto. So Yedo should really be pronounced Edo, even with the Y, I think. G.C. Morrison, who had been consul in Nagasaki, he had been seriously wounded in an attack by Ronin on the British legation in Edo in 1861. Captain F. Howe advised the British consul in Kanagawa, and Dr. Charles A. Winchester, he had been chargé d'affaires at the British legation earlier in the year. Dr. Willis wrote that he had an immense domineering wife who they nicknamed Daibutsu, the giant statue of Buddha in Kamakura. How funny. That's quite funny, isn't it? One can only vaguely imagine what she was like. But anyway, Kortatsi, Dr. Willis in Japan, 1862 to 1877, London, Athlone, 1985, page 33. So next page. Right, so we've arrived at the Namamugi incident, Namamugi Jiken. On Saturday, a most barbarous murder was committed on a Shanghai merchant named Richardson. He, with W. Clark and Marshall, were making an excursion in company with Mrs. Borrowdale of Hong Kong to Kawasaki on the other side of Kanagawa. It says Kangawa, but surely he meant Kanagawa. Whether that's Sato's misspelling, I'm not quite sure, but could well be. Here they met a train of daimyo's retainers who bid them stand aside. Those in the latter part of the train ordered them to turn back, and while doing so, they were attacked. Richardson fell from his horse in a dying state. The other two received such severe wounds that they said to the lady, "Ride on, we can do nothing for you." She was not wounded, though a blow was aimed at her which knocked her hat off with some of her hair. She rode back to Yokohama, never drawing rein, except when her pony fell under her, and entreated that help might be sent. Jenkins immediately started and found the two survivors at the American consulate, attended to by Dr. Hepburn. Vyse led off the military train in spite of Colonel Neal's order that they should consider themselves under his command, and Applin's. Belcourt sent out his escort. Price took some of his men, and there were also some French soldiers and mounted civilians. All they did was to bring back the body of Richardson, which had received 5 wounds, one cutting the belly open, one cutting the right hand off, one on the left, a spear thrust over the heart, and one cutting the neck half through. That's the first time I've actually heard about the wounds in detail. It was proposed to pursue the assassins and to capture them, but Colonel Neal would not give his consent. Everyone else is said to have agreed to do anything to punish these wretches. Okay. HMS Euryalus with Admiral Cooper on board, and the Ringdove arrived. Okay, so Richardson did not dismount, and I think that was the problem. The thing that was insulting to it was the bourrée, the insult to the daimyo. There's been quite a lot of discussion on another of my videos about what exactly happened, but I think a refusal to dismount is the key to it. So this is better known as the Namamugi incident. After the then village near Yokohama where it occurred, it had happened on the 14th of September, and Charles Lennox Richardson, a British subject, was the full name of the merchant. Sato described the murder and its ramifications at length in Diplomat, pages 51 to 55. Diplomat being a diplomat in Japan, of course. Woodthorpe, Charles Clark, and William Marshall, British merchants in Yokohama. Mrs. Margaret Watson Borrowdale. Kawasaki, now a large city between Tokyo and Yokohama. Daimyo, literally big name, a feudal lord. The lord in question was Shimazu Hisamitsu, the regent and father of Shimazu Tadayoshi, the 12th and last daimyo of the Satsuma, a powerful domain in the south of Kyushu around Kagoshima. James Hepburn, a missionary and medical doctor, the official system of Romanizing Japanese is named after him because he published a dictionary which popularized it. Duchesne de Belcourt, France's first official representative in Japan. At the time, his title was Minister Plenipotentiary. In Diplomat, Sato wrote, looking back now after the lapse of nearly a quarter of a century, I think that, yes, that would be in Bangkok. I am strongly disposed to the belief that Colonel Neil took the best course. The plan of the mercantile community was bold, attractive, and almost romantic. It would probably have been successful for the moment, in spite of the well-known bravery of the Satsuma samurai. But such an event as the capture of a leading Japanese nobleman by foreign sailors in the dominions of the Tycoon would have been a patent demonstration of his incapacity to defend the nation against the outer barbarian, and would have precipitated his downfall long before it actually took place, and before there was anything in the shape of a league among the clans ready to establish a new government. In all probability, the country would have become a prey to ruinous anarchy, and collisions with foreign powers would have been frequent and serious. Probably the slaughter of the foreign community at Nagasaki would have been the immediate answer. From page 54 of Diplomat in Japan. Then Euryalus. There have been several Royal Navy ships named HMS Euryalus. This one was a wooden-hulled screw frigate launched in 1853 with a 400 horsepower steam engine capable of 12 knots, 212 feet long, etc. Okay, so I'm quite fond of giving footnotes about ships. I don't know why, but I quite like that. So I think that was probably one of my notes. Okay, let's move on. So the next page. Just straddling the two pages. HMS Euryalus with Admiral Cooper on board and the Ringdove arrived in the afternoon of the same day. Richardson was buried this afternoon, followed to his grave by nearly every foreigner in the settlement. In the evening of Wednesday at 7, Captain Craigie of the Ringdove died of cholera and was buried next day, and followed by a still larger number of persons. I did not go as I possessed no uniform. Alabaster came over in Ringdove and goes back on Saturday. That's back to Shanghai, I think. October the 1st, Wednesday, day of the races, hot. As I subscribed, though I did not take part in the lotteries, I took my place on the grandstand. The best race was one of horses, in which the winner was only half a length ahead of two others. In another, 3 times round and a distance. Batavia took the lead and kept it all round. Besides this, he ran more than once round again. Dined on board the Ringdove on Sunday. Doctor, an old muff, who asked me if the Japanese and Chinese did not claim to have colonized the other nation's country. What is a muff? I think it's probably a fool. On Saturday, excuse me, went on board the Euryalus, where I met Charles Godfrey, a surgeon who married the eldest Massey and is a cousin of Miss Wells. Had some conversation with him when he came on shore in the afternoon. Yesterday, I made trial of 2 ponies, one belonging to a Japanese who keeps people's horses for them, and another standing 15 hands high, a chestnut owned by a botanist going home to England. I bought neither, as I was in treaty for a pony which I bought today for $35.11, $30 it's 64. However, I did buy of him the penny cyclopedia. All right. So there's the footnote about the Euryalus continues at the bottom, and then Rear Admiral Cooper, who around this time was appointed commander-in-chief in China, the naval commander. Oops, sorry. Sato did not have a high opinion of him. See the entry of 18th of June, 1863, the diary entry, that would be. Dr. Willis agreed, writing that he was a man without energy. Portazzi, Dr. Willis in Japan, London, Athlone, 1985, page 33. A diplomat in Japan, Sato wrote that the murder did not affect him greatly. The accounts of such occurrences I had heard on my way from Peking had prepared me to look on the murder of a foreigner as an ordinary everyday affair, and the horror of bleeding wounds was not sufficiently familiar to me to excite the feelings of indignation that seemed to animate everyone else. I was secretly ashamed of my want of sympathy, and yet, if it had been otherwise, such a sudden introduction to the danger of a horrid death might have rendered me quite unfit for the career I had adopted. This habit of looking upon assassination as part of the day's work enabled me later on to face with equanimity what most men whose sensations had not been deadened by a moral anesthetic would perhaps have considered serious dangers. Perhaps written twice there. Get rid of one of those. Um, Ichibu. An Ichibu means, so it's ITZ is an Ichibu. Ichibu means one bu, and 4 bu made 1 ryo. The bu is the smallest currency unit that Sato mentioned, although a bu was divided into 4 shu. In Diplomat, Sato wrote that in September 1862, the rate of exchange was 214 Ichibu to $1, the Mexican silver dollar, which was the generally recognized currency for trading in Japan and China. However, according to the treaty, all consular or diplomatic establishments received 311 Ichibu to the dollar, which helped the finances of their staff considerably. After a deduction, not a deducation, a deduction for coinage, an official with a salary of $100 received 298 Ichibu, the equivalent of $130.25. In addition, the balance after salaries had been paid of the monthly quota of Ichibu was reconverted into dollars and the profit divided among the staff in proportion to their salaries. Sato tells us that consequently staff on small salaries could live well, keep a pony and drink champagne. He acknowledged that this was improper and wrote later, I cannot look back on that period without shame, and my only excuse is that I was at the bottom of the ladder and received the proportion paid to me by those who were in charge of the business. Okay, good. So let's just slip up to the top of the page. We can. Ooh, tricky. Okay. Sorry. However, I did buy of him the penny cyclopedia. Okay, this is buying things and information for the people at $60 and some chairs and a writing table. We expect to get into our little cottage in about a week, of which I shall be heartily glad, for this hotel is a horribly noisy place where people quarrel and fight, kick up rows till 2 and 3 in the morning, and what is worse, let off firearms without caring where the bullets go to. Colonel Neil has given orders that we attend every day at the office to ask if our services are required. This will be a great interruption to serious work if he insists upon it, and will not give us a fair chance of learning the language thoroughly. It will be necessary to speak to him about it. October the 14th, spoke to Colonel Neil and got nothing out of him. He evidently thinks that I am frightfully lazy, for when I said that the office work would interfere with my studies, he said that it was much worse for both to be neglected than for one to be hindered. We are not going to Aplin's house, as Colonel Neil desired to have us in the legation, in order that we may not have any opportunity for keeping musumes. So Robertson had moved in while I am here still, and not knowing when I shall get quarters or where. There will scarcely be any room in the legation unless Jenkins or Willis moves out. I shall much prefer living in a house of my own. Oops, sorry. Oh dear. Oh. This PDF is rather tricky. There we are. Okay. Last Saturday, Robertson and I rode upon the Tokaido with the intention of going to the place where Richardson was murdered, but not having any certain knowledge, missed it by about half a mile. We passed through part of the cortege, but took care not to get into the midst of the armed men. They had for crests, and Sato has sketched them. Most likely they were part of the train of a grandee, son of a former Mikado, who passes along Enoshima to Yedo today, tomorrow, and the day after. We saw about 10 guardhouses in course of erection along the road, of which there is to be one at every 600 yards. A yakunin warned us not to go too near the train. The road is splendid all the way after leaving Kanagawa, where it is macadamized, but the rest is covered with pounded shells, which do not cause any mud. A great part of the road is lined on both sides with houses, mostly thatched instead of tiled. Some have the ridge covered with a green plant which appears endogenous. Stopped at the tea houses to get the ponies' mouths washed. One we did not stop at is very large and consists of two houses with plenty of benches and tables with people. And then we have the footnotes down here. Oops, keeps slipping. Okay, so in full, the Penny Cyclopedia of the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, Chambers Information for the People, an encyclopedia. Musume is a daughter. Obviously, here he means girlfriend. The Tokaido, the road from Edo to Kyoto, it had 53 post stations and ran along the Pacific coast. Sato traveled along it in 1867. This is mistaken. That's note 41. Most likely they were part of the train of a grandee, son of a former Mikado. So that's mistaken because there were no sons of former emperors alive at that time. Next one is Enoshima, an island in Sagami Bay. Yakunin is a general term for a public employee. The word was used to describe Japanese guards there to protect foreigners from attack. Okay, I will read the last sentence of this page and then go on to the next. One we did not stop at is very large and consists of two houses with plenty of benches and tables with people scattered about eating. I've just bought curios for Alan to the amount of nearly $25. Don't know when I shall see the money again. Played bowls last night with Markham of the Centaur, brother to John Markham, vice consul at Shanghai. Wergman, correspondent of the Illustrated and the paymaster of the Centaur, a low-browed, conceited beast who is an abomination to me. Well, later they became quite good friends, actually. Of course, I came off a loser, which was the more absurd, as in my ignorance I had made myself not to be a good player. Beat Wergman at billiards, though, much to my dislike and his disgust. Monday, 3rd of November. Why I have not written my diary lately is to be ascribed to my laziness. About a fortnight or so ago, I dined with Colonel Neil, and he made a present of a saucer of the Ming Dynasty, he said, because I could read the characters upon it. We have arranged with Mr. Brown of Kanagawa to give us 2 lessons a week in Japanese, and wrote a dispatch to Colonel Neil asking him to sanction $20 a month, which he actually did, but at the same time refused to give us more than one native teacher. Excuse me. So I had to look out for one and get through my boy, a man who says he was once a doctor, but as he has nothing to do, will teacher me for nothing. He said, you love me. I also venerate you as a master, and more to the same effect. I tried to press him to take money, but it was of no use. He had plenty of dollars and ichibus, he said. So I agreed every day from 10 till 1, but he had not shown up yet. Has not shown up yet. I have discovered a horrid piece of villainy on the part of my boy. Formerly, I wanted a Japanese dictionary of Chinese and katakana. He went out and after a bit returned and said there were no copies in Yokohama, which was a lie to begin with, and that he must go to Kanagawa, where he expected to be able to cheat without being found out. After being absent the whole day, he brought back a copy, which he said was the only one to be had. Just scrolling down a bit. And price 4 ichibu. Being new to the place, it was about 6 weeks ago or more, I paid him. Afterwards, Tosaburo told me that 2 ichibu would buy it, and so I questioned him, but he stuck to the 4 ichibu and said it was on account of the super excellent printing. But the Kanagawa bookseller established a shop in Yokohama. I bought of him, and one day I happened to ask him what was the price of the said dictionary, and he revealed to me that he had asked 1.5 for it, that Hatz had taken it away and returned next day saying that I refused to give more than 1, which he paid. Happily, I can buy books myself now, but that young man shall lose his unlawfully gotten gains. I went a few days ago to the carpenters from whom I had bought 2 chairs and a table and advanced 5 for... Okay, and now the footnotes. Whoops. Albert Markham, then a 21-year-old lieutenant in the Royal Navy, he went on to have a very successful career, rising to the rank of admiral in 1903. He was celebrated in his day for his part in the British Arctic expedition of 1875 to 76, in which he led a sledge party to the highest latitude ever reached at the time. Charles Wergman, the cartoonist and journalist, he worked for the Illustrated London News and started the Japan Punch in 1862. And later, Sato and Wergman became good friends and traveled in the interior together. In Diplomat, this is translated as Prince loves men, I also venerate the prince as a master. Sato added that he later worked out that prince was a polite way of saying you. Okay. Katakana, a Japanese alphabet mostly used for writing words of foreign origin, and Hatsu is a nickname for Sato's servant. So again, reading the last sentence on this page, I went a few days ago to the carpenters from whom I had bought 2 chairs and a table and advanced 5 for the making of a table, which was of such huge size that I immediately said it would not do. I learnt that Hutz had kept 11 of the Ichibus. Next day, the carpenter and a fat middle-aged lady came to my room, and he had the assurance to declare that another carpenter had made the table, but that he would get back the money and give it to her. Of course, I said it was a lie, but he stoutly denied it. I almost fancy he and she were agreeing together to tell lies. The same day, his aunt came and asked me to keep his wages and give them to her, because he owed her money for clothes. This he appeared not to object to, though he certainly looked rather sour. The weather has been very bad lately, but notwithstanding that, I have had some very capital rides in the country. On one occasion, when I had turned out of the road to Kanagawa and got into the Tokaido by another road, I was accompanied home by a mounted yakunin and his servant, who, though mounted on wretched beasts, managed to keep up with me. Of course, they began to talk smut and speak of going to the Gankero, but I shut them up very quickly. The path came right over the hills into the valley, but was horribly muddy. The scenery was pretty like all the country round. On the Tokaido, I met a tall fellow armed with 2 swords who made a step toward me, and I thought he was going to attack me, in which case I should have been done for, as I had no pistol. However, he passed on. The Tokaido is roughly macadamized and by no means pleasant to ride on, nor to walk, I should think. Yesterday we had an earthquake, which was said to be pretty severe. The house shook considerably, as if some very heavy person were walking in list slippers along the veranda and passages. It lasted several moments, dying away gradually, and gave me a slight sensation of sickness, insomuch that I was beginning to think that a shaking which lasted so long must arise from myself. We have got Colonel Neil to agree that from today on we shall not come into the office before 1, which will leave us the whole morning for work. That's study, as he means study. All right, 24th of November, Monday. On the 19th, the mail arrived and I received a letter in a handwriting quite unknown to me. My astonishment was great on opening it to find the signature to be that of Mannering, one of my most loved school friends. He left Mill Hill School in the north of London, midsummer 1857, and I continued to correspond with him until one day I got a letter to say that our correspondence had better cease. From some hints that the Reverend Philip Smith, our headmaster, let drop one day in class, I gathered that his parents must have obtained a sight of our correspondence, for he said something about the character of a boy who could address his friend as a dear devil of fellow. I also remember that in discussing this extraordinary speech afterwards, I said to young Phil that his father must have, okay, and then the footnotes, the Gankiro, a tea house or brothel for foreigners in Yokohama. And in Diplomat, Sato commented, my experiences in Japan of an exciting kind were pretty numerous, but I regret to say never included a really serious earthquake. And he expressed a low opinion of the insignificant specimens that the country produces nowadays. This was written in 1921, 2 years before the Great Kanto earthquake, the deadliest earthquake in Japanese history, which killed about 100,000 people. Okay, reading the last sentence of this page again. I also remember that in discussing this extraordinary speech afterwards, I said to young Phil that his father must have opened one of my letters. And the young man let it out to his mother and she to her husband, who called me into the committee room after prayers. And after assuring me that he had not done so, both refused to give any further explanation and to hear my justification. If he had done so, it would have spared me much pain at the time and afterwards, for though impelled to become reconciled to Mannering, or rather to seek his friendship again, I was held back by doubts and fears lest his regard for me had ceased. How little happiness can it now afford either of us to renew our friendship, separated by such a distance? I answered his letter last Saturday and said how glad I was to find that his love was unaltered, that mine was the same, and that I look forward to our meeting at home again. The following pages are covered over with blank sheets, and the text starts again in a random place. So we've got Boat again, whom we are going to christen the, what's that? Or Flying Fish. Whoops, sorry. All right, and we have to go back. We're losing the place again. Or Flying Fish, being determined to let everyone know that we are Chinese scholars as well, from a desire of something uncommon. She was carrying a spitsail and jib, and her outside is to be black with a white line to divide in from the green, which is the colour of the gunwale, and inside. We also intend to fly the red ensign. Tuesday, December the 2nd. Started for Edo about 1 o'clock. Colonel Neil, Aplin, Seabolt, Robertson, and myself. It was a miserable, cold ride, but we two turned up to Old Brown's, and by staying there 20 minutes got a good gallop, but caught up the rest going at snail's pace, which they had evidently been doing ever since we left them. At Kawasaki, we met with an obstruction, for the head ferryman did not know the colonel and therefore refused our passage. On going to the guardhouse close by, all the Yakunins fled away, which put the old gentleman in a dreadful state of mind. At last, a single man came pondering up entirely of his own accord, merely because he had been told that the English minister had passed without a government escort, so we got over all safe then. After passing the river, my pony took to going ahead, and in one of his escapades carried me right through to the front of the escort. I must have looked a most extraordinary figure, 1 foot out of the stirrups, and then the footnotes. Whoops, all right. Okay, so the footnotes. It looks like Sato had written about Mannering in the pages that he has covered over, presumably because he thought there was something shameful or embarrassing about the episode. This word does not seem to exist in Japanese or Chinese. In both Japanese and Chinese, flying fish is written tobi uo. Yes. That's tobi uo, flying fish. Alexander von Seabolt, who at the age of 15 had got a job as an interpreter with the British legation. He was not a native speaker of English, but was useful because he could translate between Japanese and Dutch, which was still used by the Bakufu to negotiate with foreigners. In 1868, Parkes wrote that he was an admirable oral interpreter, but a translator, which is perhaps the most important qualification of the Japanese secretary. But as a translator, he is much behind Sato. Parkes to Edmund Hammond, 30th of January, 1868, FO 391/14. And the river in note 54 is the Rokugogawa. That would be Robert Morton's local knowledge. I have no idea. Okay, so because I don't live there. All right. Trying to read the last sentence again of this page. I must have looked a most extraordinary figure, 1 foot out of the stirrups, the snaffle rein hanging down to the ground, and tugging at the remaining one with my might. We stopped at a famous tea house called Meyaski, or the Palace of Plums, where some very pretty girls showed themselves. After eating and drinking a little, we again proceeded along the Tokaido, and passing through Shinagawa, that's Shinagawa, where a drunken fellow who stood up in the road and shouted, got a fall from one of the troopers, got to the Tozenji, a temple on the seashore, just at sunset. It's nowhere near the seashore nowadays, actually, the Tozenji temple, because of all the reclaimed land. The party from the ships had not yet arrived, and we had to wait a whole hour before we could be relieved of those uncomfortable articles, long boots. Directly my mattress arrived, I lay down and tried to sleep, but was stirred up at 9 o'clock to take a sort of dinner. I went again to my bed almost directly after, and being very tired by the long ride, the result may be easily guessed. While at Edo, Colonel Neil wrote about, mentioned twice, wrote about a great deal, and I generally joined the party. The day after our arrival, we visited the Goten Yama, where the buildings for the new legation are going on. The French, American, and Dutch have plots of the same ground, and the Russians will, it is expected, occupy an old daimyo's residence behind. A very large house, which at a distance and from Shinagawa appears like two, is very nearly ready for the English minister. The rooms are all designed on a most gigantic scale and are both tall and wide. The floors are all lacquered and the walls and railings papered very prettily. Behind our offices and the guard room, containing accommodation for the officers and some of the men, the rest of whom will live over the stables. These are an immense range lying on the south edge of our plot. There are stalls for 40 horses, and altogether, considering the huge size of the beams and planks used in the construction, it is as good a place as could be wished for. Eusden has a small house being built for him on the side of the central declivity, and the house for the assistants and students is to be placed by its side. There was a great deal of discussion about this last one, the Japanese officers declaring there was not space to build it there, and Colonel Neil saying that it must be made to fit. At last it was settled that our dining and drawing room should be curtained, and the kitchens and servants' rooms planted before the window of one of us. And here are the footnotes for this page. Umeyashiki. In A Diplomat in Japan, Sato gave a much fuller description of this place. Everybody who travelled along the Tokaido in those days who had any respect for himself used to stop here, in season or out of season, to drink a cup of straw-coloured tea, smoke a pipe, and chaff the waiting maids. Fish cooked in various ways and warm sake, rice beer, was also procurable, and red-faced native gentlemen might often be seen folding themselves up into their palanquins after a mild daylight debauch. Europeans usually brought picnic baskets and lunched there, but even if they started late, were glad of any excuse for turning into this charmingly picturesque tea garden. Everyone nowadays is familiar with the Japanese plum tree as it is represented in the myriad works of art of these ingenious people, but you must see the thing itself to understand what a joyful surprise it is to enter the black-paled enclosure crowded with the oddly angular trees, utterly leafless but covered with delicate pink or white blossoms, which emit a faint fragrance and cover the ground with the snow of their fallen petals. Shinagawa, the first village to the south of Edo on the Tokaido, where travellers used to stop, it was a rough area considered unsafe for foreigners. Now, of course, there is a bullet train station there, Shinkansen. Tozenji, the first site of the British legation in Edo, and Gotenyama, an area of high ground near Shinagawa. Okay, I think that's the last note on this page, is it? I think so. All right, so let's move on to next page. Next day, we went to the Gorojo. The old gentleman was extremely disquieted by my having no uniform, and I had to beg an old forage cap of Aplin. We got to the place without any such mishap as my pony running away, though he almost succeeded in driving so on our return. The audience took place in a long room whose walls appeared to be formed of screens. There were 3 ministers and one who was said to be a spy. Between them sat 8 governors. We sat on the opposite side of the room, and 2 interpreters on their knees and a governor on a stool occupied the space between. The 4 high officers and each one of ourselves were provided with chairs and tables on which were placed an earthen hibachi and a tray with smoking implements. After a while, a double row of attendants come in with black lacquered boxes full of slices of sponge cake and blancmange. After that, oranges and persimmons. Then we had alternate cups of tea and of tea leaves ground mixed up with water and frothed, which latter was very nasty. I soon got tired of listening and took to smoking tobacco, of which I managed to consume a good quantity. To all the demands made by our government through Colonel Neil, they objected, and when £10,000 in gold was demanded as compensation for the murdered, and here we are with the footnotes. Let's go down, scroll down to see them. Okay, here we go. Long footnotes. Whoa, oh, blow. That's irritating. I managed to overrun. All right, so in Diplomat, Sato wrote that the party was Neil, Seabolt, Robertson, and himself, with Applin commanding the mounted escort. Goroju, one of the most senior councillors of the shogun. The Go is an honorific, but Sato wrote later that for a long time foreigners thought it meant five, and it was he who corrected this. In Diplomat, explained who was at the meeting on the Japanese side in more detail. Sato explained, I think that is. Three ministers, an Ometsuke, eight Gaikoku Bugyo, or governors of foreign affairs, another governor who sat in the center of the room, and two interpreters. The Ometsuke was a Bakufu official responsible for monitoring the activities of the daimyo and senior officials and reported direct to the Roju. Sato wrote that he was described to him as a spy, although I suppose censor or reporter would be nearer. The Gaikoku Bugyo served in a collegial capacity. This body was founded in 1858, and in the 10 years after this, 74 men sat on it, a sign of how impossible the job was, there being no agreement as to whether they were to try to get rid of foreigners or reach an accommodation with them. Despite the lack of clear instructions, punishment for failure could be severe. As Marius Jansen wrote, officials who had to deal with foreign countries were in constant jeopardy at a time when success was impossible to attain. Self-preservation dictated caution, hesitation, and postponement, all of which Westerners took for dishonesty and evasion. Marius Jansen, The Making of Modern Japan, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press, 2002, page 279. A hibachi is a charcoal heater, and Sato is describing matcha, a taste most Westerners have trouble with, especially at first. In Diplomat, Sato explained that the conversation was very slow because it had to be transmitted through the Japanese interpreter who translated the Japanese into Dutch and the British one who then translated into English. This gave rise to misunderstandings, and the Japanese ministers seemed every now and then to profit by this double obstruction to answer very much from the purpose, so that Colonel Neil's observations had to be repeated all over again, interpreted and reinterpreted. He added that in his frustration, he whispered to his neighbor what should have been the translation of some Dutch, for which transgression Neil later told him that he would never be allowed to be present at such an occasion again. Of course, Sato would attend many such future meetings as interpreter. In Diplomat, he wrote, "That was a relief to me, but I confess I ought to have felt more contrite than I did. At the age of 19 and a half, a boy is still a boy. But I ought to have manifested more respect for my elders." So he's admitting he was very young at the time. That's in A Diplomat in Japan. All right, I think that's the last footnote. Oh no, there's one more. Sorry, 65. Let's see if we can do that without jumping to the next page. That's the tricky part. Ah, yes. So note 65, £10,000 is a substantial but not ridiculous sum in terms of spending power, worth around £800,000 today. All right. Go back to... So reading the last sentence of this page, to all the demands made by our government through Colonel Neil, they objected. And when £10,000 in gold was demanded as compensation for the murdered Marines, they were very much taken aback. They had since refused to pay that sum, but stick to their own offer of $3,000. At last, the old gentleman Neil lost his patience, which was evidently their object all along, and we came away without doing aught except giving them a bit of Earl Russell's mind. The way they contradicted themselves was something wonderful. The next excursion was to Atangoyama, an eminence in the middle of the city from which we could see the palace very well, or rather the high wall surrounding it. On the top of the place is a tea house where we drank an infusion of salted plum flowers or cherry, after which we descended and rode home. At this place slept the murderers of the late regent the night before they proceeded to their work. Then we have photozincographic process. If a solution of gelatin and bichromate of potash is spread on a paper, and when dry, exposed to light under a negative of an engraving or plan, the lines of the drawing will be represented by insoluble lines on the coated paper, while the ground, having been protected from the action of light by the dense negative, will remain insoluble. If the paper is now coated with greasy printer's ink, and damped at the back, the soluble parts will swell and the lines will be intaglio. And when rubbed gently with a sponge dipped in a gum and water, the ink overlying the soluble parts, now again viscid and in a dissolving state, will be removed while it will adhere to the insoluble parts. The engraving or plan will then appear in black ink, which can be transferred to the surface of zinc or stone. This is the gist of the whole process, but though it appears so simple, in practice it requires care and judgment, and many difficulties were met and overcome before good results were obtained. Before very good results were obtained. Sorry. And then I'll just go down to the footnotes. Okay, here we are. And these are the last footnotes for 1862. The Marines were Corporal Crump and Charles Sweet, who had been murdered at Tozenji on the 26th of June, 1861. Earl Russell, the British Foreign Secretary. Atagoyama is a hill in central Tokyo. In Sato's day, it was a popular viewpoint, but now it is surrounded by high buildings. In A Diplomat in Japan, Sato wrote that they made a number of other journeys around Edo, visiting Oji, Senzoku, Meguro, Asakusa, and Kanda. They were accompanied by a band of mounted guards, ostensibly for our protection, but also for the purpose of preventing free communication with the people. And finally, Sato is referring to the assassination of Ii Naosuke on the 24th of March, 1860, by a group of 17 Mito and 1 Satsuma samurai. This is known as the Sakuradamon incident, after the gate to Edo Castle that Ii was murdered at. Just try and go back to that part of the text if I can. Sorry. No, go back. At this place slept the murderers of the late regent, that would be Ii Naosuke, the night before they proceeded to their work. Okay. So we have now reached the end of 1862 in Ernest Sato's diary, so I will stop the share. I hope you enjoyed that. It's the first ever diary entries by Sato regarding Japan. So he arrived in Japan in September 1862. And of course, there's plenty more to come after that. So thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Goodbye now.